The Violet Contagion, a terrifying story of when a national park becomes something else. Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. There are places on this earth, vast and untamed, that we believe we understand. We map them, name their peaks and valleys, and catalog the life that thrives within their borders. We call them national parks, sanctuaries, but we are guests there, nothing more. And sometimes, the very nature we seek to preserve becomes twisted into something unrecognizable, something wrong. The story you are about to hear is not one of a cryptid or a ghost. It is, perhaps, more terrifying because it begins with the familiar. It's a story about a place called Whispering Pines National Park and the horrifying truth of what happens when the animals that wander out aren't right. It's a chronicle of a phenomenon known only to a few terrified survivors. A contagion of the soul, visible only in one defining feature. Their eyes are the wrong color. Settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely. This is an account pieced together from a park ranger's journal, frantic radio calls, and the testimony of the lone individual who made it out with his sanity barely intact. My name is Alex. Or, it was. The man who wears my face now is just a collection of memories and scars. For 6 years, being a park ranger at Whispering Pines was more than a job. It was my entire identity. I knew every trail, the name of every stream, the distinct call of the mountain bluebird at dawn. My world was one of pine-scented air, the crunch of leaves under my boots, and the quiet, humbling majesty of the wild. The park was bordered by the small, idyllic town of Havenwood, a place where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest news was usually the winner of the annual chili cook-off. My partner, Sarah, was a biologist who worked at the park's research station. We shared a small cabin just outside the park entrance, a life built on a mutual love for the untamed world. Life was good. It was simple. It was real. The first thread in the unraveling of that reality came on a Tuesday in late September. The aspens were ablaze with gold, and the air held the first crisp promise of autumn. I was on a routine patrol along the park's eastern boundary, a stretch of dense forest that bled into the rolling farmland of the valley. It was the golden hour, that magical time when the sun hangs low, bathing the world in a warm, ethereal light. And that's when I saw it. A doe, standing perfectly still at the edge of the tree line, not 50 yards from my truck. This was hardly unusual. Deer were as common as pebbles in a creek. But this one was different. It wasn't its posture, though it was strangely rigid, its head held at an unnatural angle. It wasn't its lack of fear, though it stared directly at my vehicle without so much as a twitch of its ear. It was its eyes. I raised my binoculars, my brow furrowing. I expected the familiar, gentle, dark brown orbs of a white-tailed deer. What I saw instead caused a jolt to run through me, a primal sense of wrongness that I couldn't immediately place. The deer's eyes were a deep, luminous, and utterly unnatural shade of violet. Not a soft lavender, but a piercing, electric purple, like the color of a chemical fire or a deep space nebula. They didn't reflect the light. They seemed to generate it, glowing faintly in the twilight. I lowered the binoculars, blinking, convinced it was a trick of the light, a strange reflection from the setting sun. I looked again. The violet eyes were still there, fixed on me. They weren't the eyes of a prey animal. There was no fear, no curiosity. There was just an unnerving stillness, an intelligence that felt alien and ancient. I shook my head, muttering to myself. Chromatic aberration, I reasoned. A flaw in the binocular lenses. That had to be it. I got out of the truck, and the moment my boots hit the gravel, the deer broke its trance. But it didn't bound away in a panic. It turned its head, gave me one last look with those impossible violet eyes, and then simply walked back into the forest, its movements fluid but somehow deliberate, calculated. I stood there for a long time, the evening chill seeping into my bones. I didn't write it in my log. How could I? Sighted a deer with purple eyes. They'd have me doing a psych evaluation. I drove home. The image of those glowing orbs burned into my mind. That night, I mentioned it to Sarah. Weirdest thing today, I said, trying to sound casual as we did the dishes. Saw a doe with I think my binoculars are going haywire. It looked like it had purple eyes. She laughed, a warm, comforting sound. Purple? Alex, have you been sampling the local moonshine again? No, I'm serious. It was like amethyst. Really bright. She paused, wiping a plate dry. Could be some weird genetic mutation, I guess. Albinism can cause reddish pink eyes. Maybe some other rare condition? Or maybe it was sick. An infection causing corneal edema can sometimes look bluish or cloudy. It wasn't cloudy, I insisted. It was glowing. She put the plate away and wrapped her arms around my waist from behind. My poor, overworked ranger. Seeing mystical creatures in the woods. She kissed my cheek. Probably just the sunset hitting it just right. Don't worry about it. I let her convince me. I wanted to be convinced. It was easier to believe in a trick of the light than to accept what I had seen. But as I lay in bed that night, staring into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't seen a sick animal. I had seen a changed one. And it was only the beginning. The next few weeks were quiet, and the memory of the violet-eyed deer began to fade, becoming just a strange anecdote in the back of my mind. The park cycle continued. Tourists came and went, the leaves fell, and the first snows dusted the high peaks. Sarah and I settled back into our routine. But the wilderness remembers. The second incident was more subtle. I was hiking the High Ridge Trail, a grueling 10-mile loop that offered breathtaking views of the entire park. It was a clear, cold day. The air was thin and silent. Too silent. Halfway through the hike, I stopped for water and realized what was wrong. There were no birds. No chirps, no calls, no rustling in the undergrowth. The entire forest, usually a symphony of life, was holding its breath. Then I saw them. A flock of Steller's jays, dozens of them, perched on the branches of a massive pine tree. They were all perfectly still, like blue and black statues. Not a single one moved or made a sound. I raised my binoculars, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I focused on the nearest bird, and there it was. In the place of its beady black, I was a pinprick of searing, vibrant violet. I panned across the flock. One by one, I saw it. Every single bird had the same unnatural, glowing eyes. They weren't looking at me. They were all looking east, towards a jagged, remote peak we called the Needle, as if waiting for a command. A cold dread, sharp and real, washed over me. This was not a trick of the light. This was not a genetic mutation affecting a single deer. This was a pattern. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the silent, watchful flock. They didn't react. They just sat there, their violet eyes fixed on the horizon. I practically ran the last 5 miles back to my truck. This time, I had to tell someone. But who? I drove straight to the one person in Havenwood who might understand, or at least not immediately dismiss me as crazy. Old Man Hemlock, as we called him. His real name was Elias Vance, and he'd been the head ranger at Whispering Pines for 40 years before I ever pinned on my badge. He lived in a secluded cabin deep in the woods, a place the Park Service let him keep out of respect. He was a living library of the park's history, full of old tales and forgotten lore. I found him on his porch, carving a piece of wood. He looked up as I approached, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, knowing blue. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," he said, his voice like gravel. I sat down on the steps, the words tumbling out of me. I told him about the deer, about the silent flock of jays, about the impossible violet eyes. I expected him to laugh, or to look at me with pity. He did neither. He stopped carving and stared out at the trees, his expression grim. For a long minute, the only sound was the wind sighing through the pines. "It's starting again," he finally whispered, so quietly I barely heard him. "What's starting again?" I asked, leaning forward. He turned to look at me, his blue eyes sharp. "It's a cycle, Alex. A sickness in the land. It's happened before. Long time ago. Before the park was even a park. The old stories from the Ute people who lived here, they talk about it. A time when the animals lost their spirit and were filled with the light from a fallen star dot." He leaned back in his chair. "My grandfather saw it, back in the 30s. He was a trapper. Said the woods went quiet, just like you described. Said the animals started acting wrong. A fox that walked in circles. A bear that would just sit and watch his cabin for days. In their eyes, he said, they glowed like purple fire in the dark." My blood ran cold. "What is it?" Hemlock shook his head slowly. "Nobody knows for sure. Some said it was a disease. Some said it was a curse. My grandfather believed something sleeps under this park. Something ancient and alien. And every few generations, it stirs. It reaches out, and it touches the wildlife. Taints them. It's not rabies, Alex. It's worse. It's a loss of self. They're just puppets now. Empty vessels." He pointed his carving knife at me. "You need to be careful. The first rule, the one my grandfather lived by. Don't let them corner you. They're not just dumb animals anymore. They're smart. They work together. And they are not your friends." I left Hemlock's cabin with a deeper fear than I had ever known. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It had a name, a history, a sickness in the land. And I, a modern man of science and reason, was standing right in the middle of it. The incidents grew more frequent and more brazen. A ranger from the northern district reported a pack of coyotes moving in perfect, silent unison, their eyes flashing violet in his headlights. A family camping by the lake swore they saw a raccoon methodically unscrewing the lid on their cooler, its eyes glowing in the dark. The reports were dismissed as exaggerations, campfire stories. But I knew better. Sarah was growing worried. I was distant, jumpy. I started carrying a heavy-duty flashlight with a strobe function at all times, even in broad daylight. I found myself scanning the eyes of every squirrel, every bird that crossed my path. The vibrant green of the forest started to feel like a cage, and every shadow seemed to hold a pair of watching, violet eyes. The wrongness was spreading. It was no longer just on the fringes. It was seeping into the heart of the park, a silent, colorful plague, and we were all trapped in it. The turning point came in mid-October. The park was scheduled to close for the deep winter season in a few weeks, and the last of the autumn tourists were squeezing in their final hikes. A young couple from California, avid backpackers named Mark and Jenna, had registered for a 3-day trek to Echo Lake, a remote and beautiful spot in the park's western sector. They were due back on a Friday afternoon. When they hadn't checked in by Saturday morning, we initiated a standard search and rescue. I was part of the primary team, along with Sarah and 2 other senior rangers. The knot in my stomach was a cold, hard stone. Echo Lake was deep in the territory where I'd seen the silent jays. We found their car at the trailhead. Everything seemed normal. We set out on the trail, calling their names, our voices sounding small and hollow in the vast, quiet woods. That silence was the first red flag. It was the same profound, unnatural quiet I'd experienced on High Ridge. No birdsong. No scurrying of chipmunks. Just the rustle of our own movements and the sound of our breathing. We reached Echo Lake in the late afternoon. The scene was serene, picturesque, and deeply, deeply wrong. Their tent was set up near the water's edge. Their backpacks were inside. A small campfire had burned down to cold ash. But there was no sign of Mark and Jenna. Sarah, with her keen biologist's eye, noticed it first. "Alex," she said, her voice tight. "Look at the tent." I looked closer. The main zipper was closed. But on the side facing the forest, the fabric was shredded. Not ripped or torn by a claw, but shredded into thin, vertical strips, as if by dozens of tiny, sharp knives. And the damage was from the inside, as if they had been desperately trying to claw their way out. Then we found the camera. It was lying in the grass a few feet from the tent, its screen cracked. I powered it on. The last few photos were a horrifying chronicle of their final hours. The first few were typical hiker photos. Selfies with the lake in the background, pictures of the sunset. Then the pictures changed. There was a blurry shot of the forest, taken in low light. Then another, more focused. In the distance, between the trees, were dozens of small, glowing lights, like pairs of purple LEDs. The next photo was of a deer. It stood at the edge of their campsite, its head low, its violet eyes blazing in the camera's flash. It wasn't just standing there. It looked like it was studying them. The final photo was taken from inside the tent, through the mesh window. It was a close-up of a face. A raccoon. Its paws were pressed against the tent, and its eyes were 2 burning violet coals, filled with a cold, analytical intelligence that had no place in the face of such a creature. The timestamp on the photo was 2:13 a.m. After that, nothing. We searched the area for hours, our dread mounting with every passing minute. We found no tracks, no blood, no sign of a struggle. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. They were never found. The official report concluded it was a bear attack, despite the lack of evidence. The case was closed. But we knew. Sarah knew. The image from the camera had shattered her scientific skepticism. She had seen the same alien light in the raccoon's eyes that I had described. The fear was now a shared one, a terrible secret between us. The final confirmation, the event that turned our fear into raw, primal terror, happened a week later. We were driving back from the search area, long after dark. A storm had rolled in, and heavy rain was lashing against the windshield. We were on a narrow service road, miles from the main parkway. Suddenly, Sarah screamed, "Alex, watch out." I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded on the wet asphalt, fishtailing wildly before coming to a stop. Caught in our headlights, blocking the entire road, was a black bear. It was enormous. A mature male, easily 600 pounds. But it wasn't its size that made my breath catch in my throat. It was standing on its hind legs. Not in an aggressive, roaring posture. It was just standing there, perfectly balanced, like a man in a bear suit. Its massive head was cocked to one side, as if in curiosity. And its eyes, reflecting in the headlights, were not the small, brown eyes of a bear. They were 2 huge, luminous violet orbs, pulsing with a soft, internal light. The rain hammered on the roof of the truck. The bear did not move. It just stood there, 20 feet away, watching us. Its stillness was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. It was unnatural, a complete violation of the laws of nature I had built my life around. "Back up," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Alex, back up now." I fumbled the gear shift into reverse. As I did, the bear slowly, deliberately, raised one of its front paws and waved it. A clear, human-like gesture. A slow, mocking wave. I stomped on the gas. The tires squealed as we shot backwards, away from the monstrosity in the road. I didn't stop until we were miles away, back on the paved parkway, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive home. We didn't have to. We both understood. Hemlock was right. They weren't just animals anymore. They were intelligent. They were coordinated. And they were toying with us. The first rule was broken. We had let one corner us. And it had shown us that it knew we were afraid. The game had changed. This was no longer about strange sightings. This was about survival. The park was officially closed for the winter a few days after our encounter with the bear. The skeleton crew of remaining staff, myself and Sarah included, consolidated at the main ranger station near the Havenwood entrance. The official reason was budget cuts. The real reason, I suspected, was that head Ranger Thompson, a stern ex-military man, was getting too many weird reports and wanted to keep his people close. He didn't believe the stories, not really, but he was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut was telling him something was wrong in his park. The town of Havenwood hunkered down for the winter, blissfully unaware of the creeping wrongness just beyond the tree line. For Sarah and me, it felt like living in a besieged castle. The fear was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of our daily lives. Every shadow, every sound in the night, was a potential threat. I couldn't get Old Man Hemlock's words out of my head. It's happened before. If it had happened before, there had to be a record of it. Someone, somewhere, must have written it down. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I started digging through the park archives. The official archives were a dead end meticulously organized records of budgets, visitor counts, and geological surveys. But Hemlock had once mentioned an old, decommissioned ranger cabin on the far side of the park, a place used for storage before the main station was built. He called it the Boneyard. On a day when the sky was a flat, oppressive gray, I told Sarah I was going to check the perimeter fences. Instead, I took a snowmobile and made my way to the Boneyard. It was a dilapidated log structure, half crushed by decades of heavy snow. Inside, it smelled of decay and mouse droppings. It was filled with rusting equipment and rotting paperwork. For hours, I sifted through moldy boxes, my hope dwindling. And then I found it. Tucked away in a tin lockbox, beneath a pile of faded maps, was a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was unmarked. The pages were yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was a looping, elegant cursive, dated from 1934 to 1938. The author was a ranger named Alistair Finch. The first few entries were mundane. But then, the tone shifted. He began to describe a pervasive quiet in the forest. He wrote of animals behaving erratically. And then, he described their eyes. A most unsettling shade of amethyst, he wrote, as if a fragment of the twilight sky were trapped within them. My hands trembled as I read on. Finch hadn't just observed the phenomenon. He had studied it. He had tried to understand it. He documented how the changed animals worked in concert, how they displayed strategic thinking that defied all logic. He called it the Violet Contagion. But the last few pages were what truly chilled me to the bone. It was a list, written in a shaky, desperate hand. At the top of the page, underlined 3 times, were the words, "The Whispering Pines Protocol, for when the contagion returns." It was a set of rules, a survival guide. I read them, one by one, the dusty air of the cabin feeling thick and suffocating. Rule 1. Trust your eyes, but not what they see. The contagion can alter your perception. The familiar path may lead you astray. A figure in the distance may be a trick of the light and shadow, arranged by them to lure you. Do not trust what you think you see. Trust only the compass in your hand. Rule 2. Silence is a warning. When the forest goes quiet, they are near. They are watching. Do not call out. Do not make sudden movements. Make yourself small and wait for the sound to return. The silence is their hunting ground. Rule 3. Their mimicry is a trap. They will learn. They will learn the sound of a human voice, a cry for help, a familiar name. They will use it to separate you from your group. They cannot speak, but they can echo. Do not follow the voice in the woods. It is never your friend. Rule 4. Do not make eye contact. To look into their eyes is to let them see you. Not just your physical form, but your thoughts, your fears. They will learn what you dread most and use it against you. Avert your gaze. Always. Rule 5. The light is not your friend. They are drawn to light, but they are not afraid of it. A campfire, a flashlight, a lantern, these are beacons that tell them where you are. They will use the light to blind you, to corner you. Use light only when you must, and never for long. Darkness is your camouflage. Rule 6. They do not bleed. Do not waste your ammunition. A bullet will pass through them as if through smoke and mist. They are not bodies of flesh and blood as we know them. They are vessels. To shoot at them is to reveal your position and your futility. Rule 7. The source is the heart. They are a hive mind, a collective. They are drawn to a source, a heart that beats deep within the park. This is where the contagion is strongest. To approach the heart is to be consumed by it. The old maps call the place the Weeping Maw. Avoid it at all costs. I sat there in the freezing cabin, the journal in my lap, a cold sweat on my brow. This was not the rambling of a madman. This was a direct, terrifying confirmation of everything I had seen, everything Hemlock had warned me about. The bear waving, the silent jays, the voice mimicry that was a horror I hadn't even considered yet. They do not bleed. That rule echoed in my mind. What were we dealing with? What kind of entity could animate a creature but leave it as an invulnerable phantom? I took the journal. This was too important to leave behind. As I rode the snowmobile back to the station, the setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the snow. Every tree looked like a waiting figure. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. I showed the journal to Sarah that night. She read it in silence, her face growing paler with every page. When she finished, she looked at me, her eyes wide with a new, informed terror. Alistair Finch, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I've seen that name. He was a ranger who disappeared in 1938. His official record says he got lost in a blizzard during a winter patrol. He didn't get lost, I said grimly. He knew too much. He must have broken one of his own rules. The protocol didn't give us a way to fight. It gave us a way to hide. It was a testament not to victory, but to the desperate, terrifying hope of survival against an enemy we couldn't comprehend, let alone defeat. And as the winter deepened and the snows piled high, we had the sinking feeling that we would need to learn those rules by heart. Because the contagion wasn't hibernating. It was consolidating. It was waiting. And the siege of Havenwood was about to begin. Winter in Havenwood was usually a time of quiet beauty. Snow blanketing the pines, smoke curling from chimneys, the world muffled and peaceful. But this winter, the peace was a lie. It was a taut, stretched silence, filled with unspoken dread. The animals started to encroach on the town. It began subtly. A herd of deer, all with the same luminous violet eyes, would stand for hours at the edge of the woods bordering the town, perfectly still, just watching. They didn't eat. They didn't move. They just stood there like an army of silent sentinels. People would slow their cars to look, remarking how strange it was. They hadn't learned to fear the color of their eyes yet. Then, the squirrels. Dozens of them. They moved across the power lines in perfect, synchronized waves like a single organism. They would gather on the roofs of houses, all facing the same direction, their tiny heads cocked, their eyes tiny chips of amethyst. They weren't gathering nuts. They were observing, mapping the town. The town's pets were the first to truly react. Dogs would bark incessantly at nothing, their hackles raised, whining at the doors. Cats would hide, refusing to go outside. Some simply vanished. Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who lived on the edge of town, called the ranger station in a panic. She said a great horned owl had been sitting on her fence for 2 days straight, never moving, just staring at her house with glowing purple eyes. Head Ranger Thompson told her it was probably just a reflection and to close her curtains. I knew better. The owl wasn't hunting. It was taking inventory. Sarah and I, armed with the knowledge from Finch's journal, felt like we were living in a different reality from our neighbors. We saw the patterns they missed. We understood the intelligence behind the strange behaviors. It was a slow, methodical, psychological assault. The first major move against the town came during a heavy blizzard in late January. The power went out. Not just a flicker, but a sudden, total blackout. The backup generator at the ranger station failed to kick in. When we went to check it, we found the fuel line had been chewed through with a neat, surgical precision that no normal animal could accomplish. At the same time, the main road out of Havenwood was blocked. A massive, ancient pine tree, one of the landmarks of the area, had fallen directly across the road. But it hadn't fallen in the storm. The base of the trunk was covered in gnaw marks. Hundreds of them. From the small, sharp bites of squirrels and beavers to the massive gouges of a bear's teeth. They had worked together, for days perhaps, to chew through a tree 5 feet in diameter, waiting for the perfect moment to isolate us. We were cut off. No power. No way out. The radio was our only link to the outside world, and the storm was making reception spotty at best. The fear in Havenwood finally curdled into paranoia. The townsfolk, trapped and in the dark, started to see what we had been seeing. They started to notice the eyes. The real terror began when the mimicry started. Rule 3. It was faint at first, carried on the wind. A sound like a child crying, coming from the deep woods. A few well-meaning people tried to follow it, but were stopped by others who were too afraid to let them go. Then it got more personal. I was on watch at the ranger station one night, staring out into the swirling snow, when I heard it. Alex, help me. It was Sarah's voice, clear as day, coming from just beyond the fence line. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand going to the door. But then I stopped. Sarah was in the next room, asleep. I had checked on her not 10 minutes ago. Alex, I'm hurt, please. The voice was perfect. Her exact tone, her inflection. It was filled with pain and fear. It was a lure. A carefully crafted trap, designed for me. Rule 3. Their mimicry is a trap. Do not follow the voice in the woods. I backed away from the window, my body trembling, my mind screaming to go to her, even though I knew she wasn't there. I could feel them watching, their violet eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for me to make a fatal mistake. The siege lasted for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of darkness, cold, and psychological warfare. The animals grew bolder. Packs of violet-eyed wolves would patrol the streets at night, their movements silent and coordinated. A black bear was seen on the roof of the general store, simply sitting and watching. It felt like they were squeezing the town, tightening their grip, testing our defenses, learning our routines. They never attacked. Not in a traditional sense. They didn't need to. They were letting the fear and the isolation do the work for them. Food supplies started to run low. Tensions in the town were at a breaking point. Fights broke out over firewood and canned goods. The fragile shell of civilization was cracking under the pressure of their unblinking, violet stare. Sarah and I, along with Head Ranger Thompson and Old Man Hemlock, who had made his way into town before the road was blocked, formed a small, grim council of war. Thompson, his skepticism finally and utterly shattered, was a man transformed. His military training kicked in, and he started organizing patrols and rationing supplies. But he was trained to fight men, not phantoms. "We can't stay here," he said one night, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. "They're hurting us. They're pinning us in. We're livestock to them." Hemlock, quiet until now, spoke up, his voice heavy with ancient dread. "They're not just pinning us in. They're waiting for something. The contagion is reaching a critical mass." Finch's journal mentioned it. He called it the bloom. A time when the source becomes active, and its influence expands exponentially. It's not just the animals anymore. It's starting to affect the land itself, the very air. We knew he was right. The wrongness was becoming palpable, a physical pressure against the skin. Sometimes, in the dead of night, you could see a faint, violet haze hanging over the trees at the edge of town, a visible aura of the contagion. We had to get out. We had to warn someone. But the main road was blocked, and the woods belonged to them. There was only one chance. A powerful radio transmitter on a peak called Sentinel Ridge, on the far side of town. It was an old emergency beacon, but Thompson thought we could modify it to send a distress call on a broad frequency. But to get there, we'd have to go through them. We'd have to leave the relative safety of the town and walk directly into the heart of their territory. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only option we had left. The siege was about to be broken, one way or another. Our party was small. Me, Sarah, Thompson, and Hemlock. For figures slipping out of the silent town under the cover of a moonless, overcast night. We were armed, but we knew from Finch's journal that our guns were little more than talismans. Our true weapons were the protocol, our knowledge of the terrain, and a desperate, flickering hope. The moment we stepped into the forest, the silence descended. It was absolute, profound. Not the peaceful quiet of a winter night, but the pressurized silence of a soundproof room. Rule 2. Silence is a warning. They knew we were here. We moved slowly, using handheld GPS units to navigate. To trust our eyes was to fall into their traps. The trees seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Paths that should have been familiar twisted into unrecognizable shapes. Rule 1. We had been walking for an hour when the mimicry began again. Daddy? Is that you? The voice of a little girl, filled with tears. It came from our left. Thompson, who had a young daughter, visibly flinched, his head snapping in the direction of the sound. Hold, Hemlock hissed, grabbing his arm. Rule 3. Ranger. It's not real. Thompson's face was a mask of agony, but he nodded, turning his face forward, his jaw set. The crying continued for a few minutes, seeming to follow us, before fading away. They were testing us, probing for our weaknesses. The forest grew denser, stranger. We started to see a faint, violet luminescence in the air, clinging to the branches of trees like phosphorescent moss. The contagion was strong here. We were getting closer to something. And then we saw them. They weren't hiding anymore. They lined our path, dozens of them, standing just beyond the reach of our low-powered flashlights. Deer, foxes, wolves, raccoons, even a massive bull moose. They stood silent and still, their bodies like obsidian statues in the gloom. Their only feature the myriad pairs of glowing violet eyes that watched us pass. They didn't move to attack. They were a gallery of horrors, an honor guard leading us deeper into their domain. We followed Rule 4, keeping our eyes fixed on the ground in front of us, fighting the overwhelming urge to look into that sea of unnatural light. As we neared the base of Sentinel Ridge, the ground began to slope downwards, into a deep, shadowed ravine that wasn't on any of our maps. And from this ravine, a sound began to pulse, a low, subsonic hum that we felt in our bones more than we heard with our ears. A faint, sick-sweet smell, like ozone and rot, drifted up from the darkness. The weeping maw, Hemlock whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. The heart. Rule 7. We must not go near it. But the path to Sentinel Ridge skirted the edge of this ravine. We had no choice but to pass it. As we crept along the edge, we dared to look down. The ravine was not empty. The floor was a writhing, shifting mass of animals. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all moving in a slow, hypnotic circle. And in the center of the ravine, the source of the light and the hum, was a cave. The entrance to the cave pulsed with a brilliant, blinding violet light, casting the entire ravine in its sickening glow. It wasn't just a cave. It looked organic, alive. The rock seemed to shift and breathe. This was the heart of the contagion, the source. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the trees in front of us, blocking our path. It was a mountain lion, its sleek body silhouetted against the violet glow from the ravine. Its eyes were not just glowing. They were like two miniature suns of pure violet energy. It didn't crouch or snarl. It just stood there, watching us with an ancient, terrifying intelligence. We were trapped. The ravine on one side, the lion on the other. We can't go back, Thompson said, raising his rifle. We have to go through. The bullet won't work. I yelled. Rule 6. Before Thompson could fire, Hemlock stepped forward, placing himself between us and the lion. He held up his hands, not in surrender, but in a gesture of offering. It wants one of us, the old man said, his voice calm. It's always been the price. A trade. A life for passage. Alistair Finch wrote about it in a passage he tore out of the journal. I found it tucked in the back cover. The heart demands a toll. Elias, no. Sarah cried out. Hemlock looked back at us, a sad, tired smile on his face. I'm an old man. I've lived my life. You kids, you have to get to that radio. You have to tell the world what's here. He turned back to the lion. Go, he said to us, his voice firm. Don't look back. Run. He took a step towards the lion. The great cat didn't attack. It simply tilted its head, and the violet light in its eyes intensified. Hemlock took another step, and another, walking towards the creature as if greeting an old friend. Thompson grabbed my arm. He's right. We have to go. Now. He pulled me and Sarah, and we ran. We scrambled up the rocky path towards Sentinel Ridge, my heart breaking with every step. I risked one last glance behind me. I saw Hemlock standing before the lion, which hadn't moved. The violet light from the ravine swelled, enveloping them both. And then, they were gone. Both of them vanished into the light. We didn't stop running until we reached the summit of Sentinel Ridge, collapsing in the snow next to the radio tower, gasping for air, our lungs on fire. Hemlock had bought our passage. His life for ours. The silence of the forest returned, but this time it felt different. Emptier. We had survived the hard. But a piece of us was left behind in that violet-drenched ravine, lost forever. Grief is a luxury we couldn't afford. Fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to make Hemlock's sacrifice mean something, Thompson, a surprisingly skilled technician, went to work on the radio. Sarah and I stood guard, scanning the darkness, our flashlight sweeping the perimeter. The forest below was quiet now. The violet glow from the ravine had subsided, as if the heart was satiated, for now. The unblinking eyes were gone. It was as if we had passed a test, and they had retreated back into the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, a crackle came from the radio. Thompson had done it. He got on the mic, his voice hoarse and frantic, and sent out the distress call. He didn't talk about violet eyes or phantom animals. He was smart. He reported an outbreak of a new, highly aggressive form of rabies, a coordinated attack by wildlife, and a complete communications blackout. He reported fatalities, including Ranger Vance. He gave our location and requested immediate aerial evacuation and a full quarantine of the Whispering Pines sector. We waited. For hours, we waited, huddled against the cold metal of the tower, every sound making us jump. At dawn, we heard it. The faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a helicopter. The air lifted us out of there. As we rose above the canopy, I looked down at Whispering Pines National Park. From the air, it looked beautiful, peaceful, a pristine wilderness of green and white. There was no sign of the profound wrongness that lurked beneath, no hint of the violet contagion. The debriefing was a nightmare of bureaucracy and disbelief. We told our story the real Storito, a panel of stern-faced officials from the Park Service and Homeland Security. We showed them Finch's journal. We described the bear that waved, the mimicry, the weeping maw. They looked at us with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They diagnosed us with shared psychosis, brought on by stress, isolation, and the trauma of the blizzard and losing our colleagues. They explained away the animal behavior as a rare zoonotic neurological pathogen, a theory Sarah herself might have proposed a lifetime ago. The journal was dismissed as the historical fantasy of an unstable ranger. They thanked us for our service and placed us on indefinite medical leave. They didn't believe us. It was easier to believe we were crazy than to accept that the fundamental laws of their world were wrong. Whispering Pines and the town of Havenwood were quarantined for 6 months, under the official story of the pathogen outbreak. When they finally reopened it, the report said everything was normal. The animals were behaving as they should. The strange, neurological pathogen had apparently burned itself out. Sarah and I never went back. We couldn't. We moved 1,000 miles away, to a city, surrounded by concrete and steel, hoping to put as much distance as possible between us and that place. We tried to build a new life, but you can't outrun a memory that's burned into your soul. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in a cold sweat, the sound of a subsonic hum in my ears. Sarah still has nightmares where she hears my voice calling for help from the other side of a locked door. We are ghosts, haunted by a truth no one else will ever know. We survived, but we are not whole. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very core, that the contagion is not gone. It's sleeping. The heart under the park is dormant, digesting its toll, waiting for the cycle to begin again. Waiting for a new generation of rangers and townspeople to forget the old stories. But that's not the worst part. That's not what keeps me awake at night. The worst part is that I don't think it's contained to Whispering Pines. I think Hemlock's sacrifice, our escape, only served to open a door. A few weeks ago, I was sitting on a park bench in the city, trying to feel normal. A pigeon landed on the pavement near my feet, pecking at a discarded pretzel. It was a perfectly ordinary, mundane sight. Then, it stopped pecking. It lifted its head and looked directly at me. And for just a fraction of a second, in the center of its dull, orange eye, I saw it. A tiny, unmistakable, electric pinprick of glowing violet. It knew me. The wilderness is not a place. It's a state of being. And the protocol is no longer just for the woods. The animals that wander out of the national park aren't right. But I'm beginning to think they're not the only ones. The world is full of quiet, forgotten places, each with its own set of rules for survival. The story of the violet contagion is a stark reminder that some rules are written in blood, and some truths are too terrifying for the sane world to accept. Thank you for joining us at the Wilderness Protocol. If this story resonated with you, if it left a chill running down your spine, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more accounts from the fringes of our known world. And tell us in the comments below, have you ever been in the wild and seen something that just felt wrong? An animal that didn't act the way it was supposed to? Until next time, stay vigilant. And be careful what you look for in the dark. You might just find it looking back.